Part 1. The Galactic Council Chamber hung in the silent dark of space, a great silver ring orbiting the blue-green jewel of Virel Prime. Inside, beneath domes of polished crystal and walls lined with ancient glyphs, delegates from 23 starfaring species sat in cold silence. Their eyes, some glowing, some lidless, some hidden behind masks of polished bone, were fixed on one man. Daniel Hayes stood alone on the human platform, his gray suit slightly rumpled from the long jump through hyperspace, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not flinch. He did not look away. For 10 years, Earth had held a seat at this table, though barely. Humanity had been granted observer status after the Proxima conflict, when a ragged fleet of human ships, mostly patched-together freighters and retrofitted destroyers, had somehow held off the Krell swarm long enough for the Council's own forces to arrive. The victory had surprised everyone, especially the Council. They had expected humans to burn quickly, like dry grass in a solar flare. Instead, Earth had stood its ground. Now, a decade later, that same stubbornness was being called defiance. High Arbiter Zorvac of the Thalorians rose from his obsidian throne. His voice, translated through the chamber's universal field, came out smooth and sharp like glass dragged over metal. "Ambassador Hayes," he began, "you stand accused of violating Article 7 of the Treaty of Silent Stars. Your species has deployed mining drones into Sector Helios 9, a neutral zone under Council protection. This is not exploration. This is expansion. This is provocation." Daniel took a slow breath. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his quarters aboard the shuttle. He knew the Council saw Earth as a child playing with fire, loud, clumsy, and bound to burn itself or others. But Earth was not a child anymore. It was tired of being treated like one. "With respect, Arbiter," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm, "Helios 9 is not a protected zone. The treaty defines neutral sectors as those beyond established trade lanes and unclaimed by any sovereign power. Helios 9 meets both conditions. Our mining operations are legal, transparent, and non-military." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. The Virelian delegate, her skin shimmering like liquid pearl, tilted her head slightly. She had always been fair, if distant. But Zorvac only sneered, or what passed for a sneer in his species. His lipless mouth tightened. "Transparency?" he echoed. "You send ships with no registry codes. You activate deep-range scanners without notification. You ignore 3 formal warnings from Council patrol wings. Is that your idea of transparency, human?" Daniel didn't blink. "Our registry codes were transmitted on standard frequency Gamma 7. Your patrol wings may have failed to receive them. As for the scanners, they were mapping asteroid density for safe extraction. Nothing more, it was true. Every move Earth had made in Helios 9 had followed the letter of the treaty. But the Council didn't care about letters. They cared about order. And to them, humanity's very presence in deep space was disorder." Zorvac turned to the central dais where the Council's ruling conclave sat. "This is not the first time Earth has tested our patience," he said. "They speak of peace yet build warships. They claim neutrality yet ally with fringe systems. They demand a seat at this table yet refuse to bow to its rules." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. He wanted to shout that Earth had never asked for a seat. It had earned one in blood and fire. But he stayed quiet. Anger would only confirm their bias. The conclave conferred in whispers that sounded like wind through dead trees. Then the lead arbiter, an ancient being from the Xylos Collective whose body resembled a cluster of floating stones, spoke. "Earth is hereby ordered to withdraw all personnel and equipment from Helios sector within 7 solar cycles. Failure to comply will result in full economic sanctions, including exclusion from the Interstellar Trade Network and denial of hyperspace corridor access." The words landed like ice. Without trade, Earth's colonies on Mars, Titan, and Epsilon Eridani would starve. Without hyperspace lanes, their ships would be stranded, crawling through sublight for decades. It was not a warning. It was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet. Daniel bowed slightly. "Earth acknowledges the Council's decision," he said. "We will convey your terms to our government." He walked out without looking back. The silence behind him felt heavier than gravity. Back aboard the Earth diplomatic shuttle, Daniel stared out the viewport as Virel Prime shrank into a pale dot. His aide, a young woman named Lena Cruz, handed him a steaming cup of black coffee. They really think we'll just pack up and leave, she said quietly. They think we're bluffing, Daniel replied. They think we don't have the guts or the guns to say no. Lena frowned. Do we? Daniel didn't answer right away. He thought of General Carl Brooks waiting in orbit around Luna, with a fleet that the public didn't even know existed. He thought of Dr. Neil Foster, deep in a bunker beneath the Rockies, testing a new kind of stealth field that bent light and sensors like water around a stone. He thought of Captain Olivia Grant, who had once told him, "If they ever try to cage us again, we won't ask for the key. We'll melt the lock." "We're not bluffing," Daniel finally said. "We've just been quiet." 7 days later, President Lisa Monroe stood in the war room beneath Cheyenne Mountain. The walls hummed with encrypted feeds from every Earth outpost in known space. Around her, generals, scientists, and diplomats watched as the countdown to the Council's deadline ticked toward 0. General Brooks stood at the center of the room, his uniform crisp, his eyes hard. "If we pull out of Helios," he said, "we tell the galaxy we're weak. And weakness invites predators. But if we stay," said the Secretary of Interstellar Affairs, "they'll cut us off completely. Our people will suffer." President Monroe looked at each of them in turn. Then she turned to the main screen where a live feed showed Earth's mining station in Helios 9. Small, bright, defiant against the endless dark. "Suffering is temporary," she said. "Shame is forever. We do not leave." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Orders were issued. Codes were activated. Across the Sol system, hidden shipyards powered up, silent engines ignited, and in the shadows of asteroids and dead moons, Earth's true strength began to stir. The Council thought humanity was bluffing. They were about to learn the difference between a bluff and a promise. Farseer. While the Galactic Council debated sanctions and sent stern messages through official channels, Earth worked in silence. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, inside a cavern sealed by layers of rock and electromagnetic shielding, Dr. Neil Foster adjusted the final calibration on a prototype field generator. Around him, engineers moved with quiet urgency, checking readouts, running diagnostics, and double-checking every wire. This was Project Iron Veil, and today was its final test. Neil wiped sweat from his brow. He wasn't a soldier. He'd once taught physics at a university in Chicago. But when the Krell attacked Proxima, he'd volunteered. Not to fight, but to build. And now, 7 years later, his work might decide whether Earth stood tall or knelt forever. The test subject was a standard cargo hauler, the kind used to ferry ice from Europa to orbital stations. On the outside, it looked ordinary. Dented hull, faded paint, blinking navigation lights. But inside, its cargo bay had been stripped and replaced with modular weapon pods, shield capacitors, and a stealth core the size of a refrigerator. With the press of a button, this harmless-looking ship could vanish from sensors and unleash firepower rivaling a light cruiser. "Initiate sequence," Neil said. A technician tapped a console. The lights in the hangar dimmed. A low hum filled the air. Then the hauler shimmered just for a second like heat rising off desert sand. On the monitoring screens, its signature dropped to near 0. Even thermal and gravimetric sensors showed nothing but empty space. "It worked," someone whispered. Neil let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Not just worked," he said. "It's perfect." Meanwhile, far above the moon, aboard the ESS Vanguard, Captain Olivia Grant reviewed fleet deployment plans. The Vanguard was Earth's first true deep space battleship, sleek, fast, and armed with railguns that could punch through enemy shields at 5,000 kilometers. But its real strength wasn't its weapons. It was its crew. Every officer, every engineer, every pilot had been chosen not just for skill, but for discipline. They knew what was coming, and they were ready. Olivia had grown up in a fishing village in Maine. She remembered storms rolling in off the Atlantic, how her father would say, "You don't fight the sea. You learn its rhythm, then move with it." Space was no different. The Council thought in straight lines, rules, hierarchies, punishments. But humanity had always danced in the gray. Her comm chimed. It was General Brooks. "The Council's enforcement fleet just jumped into the Helios belt," he said. "Led by the sovereign will. They're broadcasting a final warning. If our stations don't power down in 6 hours, they'll disable them by force." Olivia didn't hesitate. "Then we move now." Across the Sol system, silent orders went out. Freighters that had been loading ore on Ceres changed course. Repair drones near Jupiter powered down their beacons. Mining stations in the belt began running emergency drills, but not for evacuation, for combat readiness. Back on Earth, President Monroe addressed the public. Her speech was short, calm, and broadcast on every channel. "We have not broken any treaty," she said. "We will not abandon our people or our rights, but we also do not seek war. Let that be clear." The council dismissed her words as propaganda. They believed Earth was stalling, hoping for last-minute negotiations. They did not know that every human vessel in the Helios belt had already received new orders. They did not know that what looked like a civilian operation was, in fact, a trap wrapped in plain sight. Daniel Hayes, still aboard his diplomatic shuttle near Virel Prime, sent one final message to the council chamber. It was not angry. It was not boastful. Just a single line. Earth honors treaties, but only those written in good faith. The Thalorians laughed. The Virelians exchanged worried glances. The Xylos stones remained still. No one understood the warning. 6 hours passed. The Sovereign Will, a massive Xanthari warship shaped like a blade, moved into position above Station Helios 7. Its weapons powered up. A warning tone echoed through the station's corridors. Workers evacuated to shielded bunkers. Outside, the stars watched in silence. Then, without another word, the Sovereign Will fired. A plasma bolt streaked toward the station's main reactor. But before it struck, something strange happened. The bolt veered off course as if caught in an invisible current. Then from the darkness between two nearby asteroids, a cargo hauler appeared, not with engines blazing, but already firing. Its railgun round struck the Sovereign Will's port shield generator. Sparks erupted across the alien hull. Alarms blared inside the Xanthari command deck. Before they could react, 3 more haulers decloaked. Then 5, then 12. They moved like ghosts, striking fast and vanishing again. Gravitic mines bloomed in the void, distorting space and trapping support ships in slow-time bubbles. EMP pulses fried unshielded comms. The Council fleet, built for show and intimidation, had never faced anything like this. Small, smart, and utterly unpredictable. High above the chaos, the ESS Vanguard emerged from behind a gas giant's shadow. Olivia stood on the bridge, hands resting lightly on the railing. "Target their command array," she said. "Non-lethal strike. We want them disabled, not destroyed." The Vanguard's main railgun fired once. A tungsten slug, moving at a fraction of light speed, pierced the Sovereign Will's bridge shielding and embedded itself in the deck just meters from the Xanthari captain's chair. No explosion, no fire. Just a smoking hole and a message written in metal. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, the Council's fleet floated helplessly. Engines dead, weapons offline, crews unharmed but stunned. Earth's forces withdrew as quietly as they had appeared, leaving only silence and drifting wreckage. Back on Earth, people watched the live feed with wide eyes. There were no cheers, no chance of victory, just a deep, quiet pride. They had not started this fight, but they had ended it, on their terms. Neil Foster watched the footage from his lab on Mars. He thought of his students back in Chicago, now grown, some serving on those very ships. He smiled faintly. Olivia Grant ordered her crew to stand down. "Let them send their reports," she said. "Let the whole galaxy see what happens when you mistake patience for weakness." And across human space, every ship, every station, every citizen knew the truth. Earth had not bluffed. It had prepared. And preparation, as it turned out, spoke louder than any treaty. Part 3. The silence that followed the battle in the Helios belt was louder than any explosion. Across the galaxy, news of Earth's strike spread like wildfire through data streams and diplomatic channels. The Council's fleet, once seen as untouchable, had been neutralized in minutes by ships they had dismissed as harmless cargo vessels. No lives were lost, no stations destroyed, but the message was clear. Humanity was not to be tested. On Virel Prime, panic rippled through the council chambers. Delegates who had once spoken of Earth with amused condescension now huddled in private corridors, voices low and urgent. High Arbiter Zorvac demanded immediate military action. "They have humiliated us," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "We must respond with overwhelming force before other species think they can defy us too." But not everyone agreed. The Virelian delegate, her luminous eyes thoughtful, reminded the conclave of an old saying from her people. "A lion does not roar at a mouse. It watches. She argued that Earth's restraint, disabling ships instead of destroying them, was not weakness but control. And control, she warned, was far more dangerous than blind fury. Meanwhile, on Earth, there was no celebration. President Lisa Monroe gathered her advisors in the underground command center beneath Cheyenne Mountain. The mood was tense, not triumphant. They had won a battle, but the war for respect had only just begun. General Carl Brooks stood before a large screen showing real-time intelligence feeds. "The Zenthari homeworld is mobilizing," he reported. "At least 3 carrier groups are preparing to jump. The Thalorians are calling for a full blockade of Sol space. If they cut off our hyperspace lanes, our colonies will be isolated within weeks." President Monroe nodded slowly. "Then we make sure they never get the chance." She turned to Marcus Lee, the quiet cyber analyst who had spent years infiltrating Council data networks. "Marcus, what do we have?" Marcus adjusted his glasses. "I've been monitoring internal Council comms since the battle. Not everything is encrypted. There's disagreement. The Xylos Collective is refusing to support military action. The Cathari Syndicate is worried about trade disruption. And the Varelians, they're asking for direct talks with Earth." A murmur went through the room. Direct talks meant recognition. It meant Earth was no longer a nuisance to be managed, but a power to be negotiated with. "Good," Monroe said, "but we can't rely on their goodwill. We need to show them that war with Earth isn't just costly, it's impossible to win." Back in orbit, Captain Olivia Grant received new orders. The ESS Vanguard and its support fleet were to remain hidden near the edge of the Helios belt, ready to strike again if needed. But this time their mission wasn't just defense, it was deterrence. Every ship under her command carried updated stealth protocols and new sensor jamming tech, developed by Neil Foster's team. They were ghosts with teeth. On Mars, Neil himself was already working on the next phase of Project Iron Veil. If the Council thought Earth's first strike was surprising, they hadn't seen anything yet. He was integrating AI-assisted targeting into the weapon pods, allowing even civilian-piloted ships to hit moving targets with pinpoint accuracy. The idea wasn't to build an empire. It was to ensure no one could ever force Earth to its knees again. Across human space, ordinary people went about their lives, but with a new quiet confidence. On Luna, children played in domed parks, their laughter echoing under artificial skies. On Titan, miners hauled ice under orange haze, knowing their work powered more than just cities. It powered independence. No one spoke of fear. They spoke of readiness. Then came the leak. Marcus Lee, working through layers of encrypted channels, released carefully selected data to neutral news outlets across the galaxy. Not battle footage, everyone had seen that. Instead, he shared logs from the Sovereign Will's own systems, showing how Earth's forces had deliberately avoided targeting life support or escape pods. He included telemetry proving the railgun slug fired by the Vanguard had been slowed at the last second to prevent hull breach. He even released a short audio clip of Olivia Grant's order, non-lethal strike. "We want them disabled, not destroyed." The effect was immediate. Species that had long resented the Council's heavy-handed rule began to question why they feared Earth, but admired its discipline. On fringe worlds, murals of human ships appeared overnight. In trade hubs, merchants started using Earth Standard credits. The narrative was shifting. High Arbiter Zorvak tried to dismiss the leak as human propaganda, but even his allies began to waver. When the Xylos stones floated into emergency session and declared, "Force without wisdom is noise," the tide had truly turned. Back on Earth, Daniel Hayes finally returned home. He stepped off his shuttle at Geneva Spaceport, where no crowd waited, no cameras flashed. Just a single aide holding a tablet with the latest updates. As he walked toward the waiting car, he looked up at the sky, blue, clear, and full of stars that no longer felt distant or hostile. "They thought we were bluffing," he said quietly. The aide nodded. "Now they know we don't deal in bluffs." In the days that followed, the Council's war drums grew quieter. The Zenthari carrier groups remained in dock. The Thalorians stopped calling for blockades. Instead, formal requests for dialogue began to arrive, not through official channels but through backdoor envoys and coded messages. President Monroe did not reply immediately. She let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them remember the silence of their disabled ships drifting in the Helios belt. Because Earth had done more than win a battle. It had rewritten the rules. And in the cold calculus of galactic power, there was no stronger language than action, calm, precise, and utterly undeniable. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity was not a child. It was a neighbor, and neighbors who could defend their home deserved respect, not suspicion. As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across hidden shipyards and quiet labs, Earth stood ready not for war but for peace. The kind of peace that only comes when no one dares to test you again. Part 4. The weeks after the Helios engagement passed in a strange quiet. No fleets moved. No threats were broadcast. Even the usual chatter across galactic channels slowed, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. On Earth, life continued, but beneath the surface, everything had changed. People walked taller. Workers in orbital docks spoke with calm certainty. Children in schools learned not just history but strategy. Humanity had shown its hand, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what it meant. President Lisa Monroe knew this calm would not last. The Council was wounded, not broken, and wounded powers often struck hardest when they thought no one was watching. So she prepared, not for another battle, but for the harder fight. Trust. She called Daniel Hayes back into service. Not as a diplomat begging for a seat, but as a negotiator setting terms. "We don't want to rule them," she told him in her office, sunlight streaming through the window. "We just want them to see us as equals. Nothing more." Nothing less, Daniel nodded. He had spent years speaking their language, bending to their customs, softening Earth's edges to fit their mold. Now he would speak plainly, and if they refused to listen, Earth would simply walk away. They had the ships. They had the tech. They had the will. They no longer needed permission to exist. Meanwhile, General Carl Brooks oversaw the quiet expansion of Earth's defense grid. New sensor buoys were placed along the outer rim of Sol space, disguised as comets or space debris. Hidden fuel depots were stocked near Neptune and beyond. Every mining station now doubled as a listening post. Earth was not hiding. It was watching. Captain Olivia Grant kept the ESS Vanguard on silent patrol near the edge of known space. Her crew trained daily, not just in combat but in crisis response, rescue ops, and first contact protocols. "We're not just soldiers," she reminded them. "We're the face of Earth now. Every move we make tells a story." And the story they wanted to tell was clear. Strength with restraint, power with purpose. Then came the first real sign of change. A Varelian envoy, traveling alone in a small diplomatic skiff, requested permission to dock at Earth Orbital Station Gamma. No demands. No conditions. Just a simple request to speak with human leadership. President Monroe approved it immediately, but not in Geneva, not in orbit, and certainly not on Varel Prime. She invited them to Luna. The meeting took place in a dome overlooking the Sea of Tranquility. The Varelian delegate, Elder Malus, arrived wrapped in flowing silver robes, her skin shimmering softly under the dome lights. She did not bring guards. She did not bring recorders. Just a small data crystal and a question. "Why did you spare our ships?" she asked Daniel, who sat across from her at a plain metal table. "Because we are not your enemy," Daniel replied. "We never were." Malus studied him for a long moment. "The Council believes power must be shown through destruction. You showed power through mercy. That confuses them." "It shouldn't," Daniel said. "Mercy takes more strength than rage." Malus placed the data crystal on the table. "This contains proposed terms for a new agreement. Not a treaty of control. A pact of mutual respect. It includes shared access to neutral zones, joint scientific exchange, and a council seat with full voting rights. For Earth." Daniel didn't touch the crystal. "And what does the Council want in return?" "Only this," Malus said. "That Earth never again acts alone in galactic matters without consultation." Daniel smiled faintly. "We acted alone because no one would listen. If you're ready to listen now, we're ready to talk." The conversation lasted 3 hours. When it ended, Malus bowed slightly, a gesture rare among her people, and returned to her ship. She did not promise support, but she did not leave empty-handed either. Daniel gave her a small Earth-made device, a simple music player loaded with songs from every continent. "So you remember," he said, "that we are more than weapons." Back on Earth, news of the meeting spread quietly. No headlines, no fanfare, but hope began to grow. Not everyone was pleased. High Arbiter Zorvac called the Varelians traitors. The Thalorians accused Earth of using emotional manipulation to weaken galactic order. But their voices were growing lonelier. Even among their own allies, doubt had taken root. How could a species so young wield such precision? How could they strike so hard and yet hold back? Then Marcus Lee struck again, not with weapons but with truth. He released a second data packet, this time showing internal council debates from the days before the Helios incident. In it, Zorvac had argued for immediate sanctions not because of treaty violations, but because human expansion threatens Thalorian influence in the outer sectors. The truth was laid bare. The council hadn't cared about rules. They'd cared about control. Outrage followed. Smaller species, the ones long ignored by the council, demanded reforms. Trade guilds threatened to shift operations to human-aligned hubs. For the first time, the Galactic Council faced pressure from within. President Monroe watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. She knew Earth could not win by force alone. Real victory came when others chose to stand beside you, not because they feared you, but because they believed in you. On Mars, Neil Foster received a surprising message. A Cathari engineer, one of the galaxy's finest shipwrights, had requested access to Earth's public research archives on adaptive shielding. It was a small thing, but it was a start. Olivia Grant, still patrolling the void, received new orders. The Vanguard was to escort a civilian science vessel to the edge of the Helios belt, not for defense but for joint observation with Varelian astronomers. The mission had no weapons, no hidden pods, just humans and aliens looking at the stars together. As the ship prepared to depart, Olivia stood on the observation deck watching Earth rise over the lunar horizon. It looked small, fragile, but she knew better. They had been tested. They had answered. And now, slowly, the galaxy was learning to see them not as a threat, but as a partner. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, humanity was not alone in wanting peace. And that, more than any battle, was worth fighting for. Part 5. 3 months after the Helios engagement, the stars above Earth looked the same, but everything beneath them had changed. The Galactic Council no longer spoke of sanctions or blockades. Instead, their messages carried words like dialogue, cooperation, and mutual understanding. It was not trust yet, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, Earth had learned, were worth protecting. The meeting place was not Varel Prime. It was not a grand chamber built by ancient species. It was the ESS Vanguard, now docked at the newly built Earth Orbital Accord Station, a ring of steel and glass hanging peacefully above the blue curve of the planet. 12 species sent representatives, not just the old powers but newer voices too. The Cathari Trade Guild, the Silent Scholars of Xylos, even a young envoy from the Fringe World Coalition that had long been ignored by the Council. They came not in warships, but in unarmed shuttles. They wore no armor. They carried no weapons. And for the first time, they stepped onto human ground not as judges but as guests. President Lisa Monroe greeted them in the station's central hall. She wore a simple dark suit, no medals, no symbols of rank, just the quiet dignity of someone who had stared down empires and refused to blink. Beside her stood Daniel Hayes, Olivia Grant, and General Carl Brooks. Not as a show of force, but as a sign. Earth's strength came from many hands. At the center of the hall sat 2 objects on a plain table. One was the Treaty of Silent Stars, printed on aged synth parchment, its edges frayed from years of use and abuse. The other was a new document, clean and unmarked, titled The Accord of Mutual Respect. High Arbiter Zorvac was there too, though he stood apart, his posture stiff, his silence heavy. He had not wanted this, but even he could not ignore the shift in the galaxy. Too many had seen Earth's restraint. Too many had questioned the old ways. He had come not to agree but to witness. The Varelian elder Melis stepped forward first. Without a word, she placed her hand on the new accord and signed her name with a light pen that glowed faintly blue. One by one, the others followed. The Xylo stones hovered near the table, their collective mind imprinting a resonant signature onto the document. The Cathari envoy used ink made from crushed star orchids, a symbol of lasting bonds. When it was Zorvac's turn, the room grew still. He looked at the old treaty, then at the new one. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, he reached out and placed the Treaty of Silent Stars into the small incinerator beside the table. Flames rose clean and quiet, and the old rules turned to ash. He did not sign the accord that day. But he did not stop it either, and in the language of power, that was enough. After the signing, the delegates were given a tour of the station. They saw hydroponic gardens feeding thousands, schools where children learned alien languages alongside math, and labs where human and Varelian scientists worked side by side on clean fusion. They saw no weapons, no propaganda, just people building a future. Later, as the sun set over Earth and cast golden light through the observation deck windows, Daniel Hayes stood alone for a moment. Olivia joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. Real coffee, grown in orbital greenhouses, not the synthetic kind. They thought we were bluffing, she said, her voice soft. He looked out at the stars, now dotted with human and alien ships moving in peaceful rhythm. Now they know we don't deal in bluffs. We deal in facts, she smiled. And what's the fact today? That peace isn't given, he said. It's earned. And kept below them on the surface of Earth, life went on. In Tokyo, students walked home under neon lights. In Nairobi, farmers checked their crops under warm sun. In Buenos Aires, musicians played in open squares. None of them had fired a shot. None of them had signed a treaty. But all of them had stood behind the choice to say no to fear and yes to dignity. Back on the Vanguard, General Brooks reviewed the final fleet status report. All ships were standing down. Project Iron Veil would remain active, but only as a deterrent. The real work now was not in hiding weapons, but in sharing knowledge. Earth had already sent engineering teams to help rebuild the sovereign will, not as a gesture of pity, but of partnership. Neil Foster, still on Mars, received a message from the Cathari engineer he'd shared data with weeks before. It contained schematics for a new kind of shield modulator, one that used less power and lasted longer. Attached was a simple note: for the next time we look at the stars together. Even Marcus Lee, usually buried in code and silence, allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. His work had not won the war, but it had helped turn suspicion into curiosity, and curiosity, he knew, was the first step toward understanding. As the Accord station drifted in orbit, bathed in starlight and earthlight, the galaxy watched. Some still doubted, some still feared, but many now hoped, because Earth had proven something rare, that a young species could wield great power without losing its humanity. And that was the true victory. Not in shredded treaties or disabled warships, but in open doors, shared tables, and the quiet courage to build something better than what came before. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity was not a threat to order. It was a promise of something new. And in the endless dark between the stars, that promise burned brighter than any weapon ever could.